July 14, 1969. Phuoc, Toi Province, South Vietnam. The air hangs thick and unmoving, a wet heat that presses against the skin like a second uniform. Dawn is still 20 minutes away, but the jungle is already awake. Cicadas pulse in waves. Somewhere far off, a gibbon calls, then goes silent. Captain James Hawk Reynolds, MACV SOG, Recon Team Idaho, lies prone on a low ridge overlooking a narrow trail that cuts through elephant grass and scrub. His face is streaked with black grease paint, his rucksack heavy with radio batteries, claymores, extra ammunition, and survival gear meant for a mission that might last days if things go wrong. Sweat beads on his forearms and runs into the dirt beneath him. He barely blinks. To his left and right, his team holds position. Sergeant First Class Tommy Delgado grips his Car 15 eyes, scanning the shadows. Specialist Eddie Klein keeps the PRC-25 radio cradled against his chest, antenna angled low to avoid catching light. These men are used to silence, used to moving through enemy-controlled jungle where discovery means annihilation. But this morning, they are not the hunters. They are observers. Below them, moving toward the trail from the west, is an Australian SAS patrol. 3 men. Then a fourth appearing so suddenly, Reynolds almost misses him. There is no sound of brush snapping, no rustle of webbing, no metallic click. It is as if the jungle itself has rearranged its shadows. Reynolds tightens his jaw. The Australians wear faded jungle greens without excess straps or loose fabric. Their boots are dull, with use no shine, no fresh leather. Their faces are camouflaged, not with bold patterns, but with smudges that break up shape and reflect nothing. Each man carries a rifle held close to the body muzzle, low finger indexed along the frame. What strikes Reynolds first is what they are not carrying. No oversized rucksacks bulging with gear, no spare radios bouncing against hips, no extra canteens clanking softly, no bandoliers of grenades. Each man looks stripped down to the bare minimum. Rifle, ammunition, water, a small pack that barely rises above the shoulders. They move in a staggered file, spacing precise, never bunching, never drifting too far apart. When the lead man halts, the others freeze instantly. Not a whispered command, not a raised fist, just awareness. Reynolds glances at Delgado, then back to the patrol. Delgado's eyes are wide, his expression unreadable. The Australians advance toward the trail. The lead trooper stops at the edge of the brush and crouches slowly, weight distributed so evenly that even the damp leaves beneath him do not shift. He studies the trail for a full minute, maybe longer. Time stretches in the jungle. A faint breeze passes through, carrying the smell of wet earth and decaying vegetation. Reynolds waits for the usual signs. A cough, a boot adjustment, the soft rasp of fabric against bark. Nothing. The second trooper glides forward, placing his foot where the first man had stepped moments earlier. He does not look down. He already knows where his foot will land. The third man angles off slightly, covering the flank eyes, scanning a sector that Reynolds realizes overlaps perfectly with the others. It is discipline, but not the rigid kind drilled on parade grounds. This is something quieter, something absorbed. Reynolds feels an unexpected tension in his chest, not fear, but recognition. He knows what good looks like. He has run recon across Laos and Cambodia. He has watched men bleed out in triple canopy jungle because a snapped branch gave them away. These Australians are ghosts. The lead trooper crosses the trail in 2 steps, barely bending the grass. The others follow, timing their movement, so there is never more than 1 man exposed at a time. The patrol pauses on the far side, melts into the undergrowth, and is gone. Reynolds exhales without realizing he had been holding his breath. Behind him, Klein whispers, barely audible. Jesus. No one answers. Reynolds checks his watch. Less than 3 minutes. That is all it took for the SAS patrol to cross open ground that would have taken an American recon team twice as long. and they did it without leaving a signature the jungle could remember. Reynolds lies there listening to the insects resume their rhythm and feels something shift in his understanding of warfare in Vietnam. He has been trained to survive. He has been trained to fight. What he has just witnessed is something else entirely. Reynolds stays prone long after the Australians disappear, replaying the movement in his mind. Every step, every pause. He finally signals a slow pullback. The MACV SOG team eases off the ridge with care, but even with discipline and experience, Reynolds can feel the difference. A twig shifts under Delgado's knee. A leaf slides an inch too far. Nothing loud, nothing careless. Yet the jungle registers it. They regroup at a concealed rally point beside a shallow stream choked with reeds. The water is dark and slow, carrying the smell of rot. Klein checks the radio, adjusting the handset with exaggerated care. Reynolds kneels scanning the perimeter while his thoughts stay with the SAS patrol. 2 hours later, the joint mission begins to converge. The Australians reappear without warning, not from the direction Reynolds expects, but from behind his team's left flank. A presence rather than a sound. One moment the space is empty. The next, a trooper is there crouched low, rifle, steady eyes calm. The others resolve into view in sequence, each man already covering an arc. Reynolds raises his hand, immediately palm out, weapon lowered. The SAS patrol leader steps forward. Captain Michael Mick Travers, early 30s. Lean. His uniform looks worn thin at the elbows, sweat darkened at the collar. His eyes flick across the SOG team in a single sweep, cataloging gear posture, breathing. It is not arrogance, it is assessment. Travers speaks softly. Australian accent controlled. Trails clean, no sign for the last 12 hours. Locals moved through yesterday evening. Light traffic. Reynolds nods. You cross it like there was nothing there. Travers allows a faint smile. There was something there. That's why we took it slow. They exchange quick mission details. Enemy presence reported 2 kilometers north. Suspected NVA logistics movement after last light. The plan is simple on paper. Observe, confirm, avoid contact at all costs. As they move out together, Reynolds finds himself watching the Australians more than the jungle. Their formation flexes constantly. No fixed point man for more than a few minutes. The lead rotates without discussion. When one man slows, another seamlessly takes his place. Their spacing adjusts instinctively to terrain. Tight in thick brush. Wider in open bamboo stands. They never silhouette themselves, never pause in obvious cover. They choose positions that feel wrong to Reynolds at first glance, places an American patrol would avoid because they seem exposed. Yet from those spots, the Australians can see without being seen. Reynolds feels the weight of his own rucksack with every step. Extra ammunition, extra water, extra gear for contingencies stacked on contingencies. He has always believed redundancy saves lives. Watching the SAS, he begins to wonder if excess kills them. They halt near a termite mound overlooking a shallow valley. Travers gestures. The Australians drop into positions that seem improvised yet perfectly aligned. One man prone, one kneeling behind brush, one standing slightly back, rifle-angled, scanning above eye level. Reynolds brings his binoculars up slowly. Movement flickers in the valley. Dark shapes threading between trees. North Vietnamese army porters, light packs, rifles slung. A squad escort moving cautiously, but not cautiously enough. The Australians do not react. No shift in posture. No tightening of grips. They have already seen them. Minutes pass. Sweat runs into Reynolds' eyes. He does not wipe it away. The NVA element passes through unaware. The jungle closes behind them. Travers glances at Reynolds. We could have taken them, he says quietly. Reynolds nods. Would have been ugly. Travers's gaze returns to the valley. And loud. That single word lands hard. Reynolds has called in airstrikes. He has watched gunships rake tree lines. He has trusted firepower to solve problems silence could not. But here, in this moment, loud feels like failure. As they withdraw, Reynolds notices something else. The Australians erase themselves as they move. Bent grass is brushed back. Broken leaves are turned underside down. Footprints are scuffed with care. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes discipline beyond speed. By the time they reach the extraction zone hours later, Reynolds is exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with distance. His understanding of reconnaissance has been challenged at a fundamental level. As the helicopters thump overhead and the teams prepare to lift out, Reynolds looks once more at the SAS patrol. They stand relaxed, but alert, rifles, slung eyes never still. The jungle has not noticed them. The helicopter lifts away its noise, tearing a hole in the quiet the Australians had guarded all day. Rotor wash flattens the grass and whips leaves into the air. For a few seconds, the jungle is forced to acknowledge their presence. Then the sound fades and the canopy begins to settle back into place. Reynolds sits strapped into the Huey boots, hooked under the bench seat, watching the landing zone shrink below. He can still see Travers and his men standing apart from the American chalk, already scanning the perimeter even as the aircraft climbs. Their posture never changes. They are not relaxed. They are ready. Back at the forward operating base, the contrast becomes sharper. American troops move with urgency and noise. Radios crackle. Boots scrape gravel. A generator rattles somewhere behind the hooches. Marines joke loudly near the perimeter wire. The base is secure by firepower, by sensors, by layers of defense stacked thick as sandbags. The Australians move through it like visitors from another war. They unshoulder rifles only after choosing positions. They sit with their backs to walls not in the open. Their gear stays tight, compact, never scattered. When an American lieutenant offers coffee, Travers accepts with a nod, but his eyes never stop tracking movement around the compound. Reynolds joins him near a map table inside a dimly lit operations hut. Sweat-stained maps are taped to plywood. Grease pencil marks show suspected enemy routes. The smell of instant coffee and damp canvas hangs in the air. "You boys travel light," Reynolds says, keeping his voice neutral. Travers takes a sip, grimaces slightly. "We travel quiet." Reynolds gestures toward his own gear piled nearby. Extra magazines, claymores, radio spares. "We plan for contact." Travers nods once. "We plan to avoid it." The words are not criticism. They are fact. Reynolds thinks of missions where his team moved fast, relying on speed and aggression to punch through danger. He thinks of firefights that began with a single snapped branch and ended with air support and body bags. He has always believed recon meant being ready to fight your way out. Travers' philosophy suggests something else. Recon means never being found in the first place. Later that evening, the teams debrief together. An intelligence officer takes notes as Reynolds describes the NVA movement. Travers adds small details that Reynolds had missed. The way one porter favored his left leg. The spacing between escorts. The absence of rear security that suggested overconfidence. "How'd you see that?" the officer asks. Travers shrugs. They showed it. After the debrief, Reynolds walks the perimeter alone. The sun has dropped low, turning the sky a dirty orange. The jungle beyond the wire is already swallowing the light. He imagines Travers and his men out there now moving without wire, without floodlights, without the illusion of safety. Just skill and patience. Reynolds realizes something uncomfortable. His team is good, very good. But the Australians are operating on a different frequency. Not braver, not tougher. Simply quieter. That night, as Reynolds lies on his cot listening to distant artillery, he cannot stop replaying the way the SAS patrol crossed that trail at dawn. How the jungle never noticed them. He understands now why MACV SOG leadership wanted this exchange, not to learn new tactics, but to unlearn old habits. In Vietnam, survival does not always belong to the strongest force. Sometimes it belongs to the one that leaves no trace at all. 2 nights later, Reynolds finds himself awake again before first light. The base is quiet in that fragile window before dawn, when guards shift positions and the jungle seems to lean closer. He sits on an ammo crate outside the hooch, cleaning his rifle more out of habit than need. Across the compound, the Australian SAS patrol prepares to move out. There is no drama to it. No raised voices, no last-minute gear checks shouted across the yard. Each man inspects his own equipment, then glances at the others. A nod here, a brief hand signal there. In less than 5 minutes, they are ready. Reynolds watches closely. One of the Australians removes a strip of tape from his rifle sling and rewraps it tighter, eliminating a faint crease that might catch. Another adjusts his boot laces, tucking the ends away so nothing dangles. Small things. Obsessive things. But Reynolds knows the jungle punishes carelessness at the smallest scale. Travers notices him watching. "You ever count how many sounds a man makes just breathing?" Travers asks quietly. Reynolds looks up. "Can't say I have." Travers crouches, presses his palm against the dirt. Jungle hears it. It hears weight shift, hears fabric scrape bark, hears heartbeat if you give it enough time. Reynolds absorbs that in silence. Later that morning, Reynolds is invited to accompany the Australians on a short movement near the perimeter. No objective, no enemy expected. Just movement. He agrees immediately. They step beyond the wire, and the world changes in an instant. The bass noise drops away. The smell of fuel and sweat gives way to wet leaves and mold. The Australians slow to a pace that feels almost uncomfortable. Reynolds has to fight the urge to hurry to cover ground to do something. Travers leads stepping where the earth looks solid, but is not obvious. Reynolds tries to mirror him. It is harder than it looks. His pack shifts. His boot sinks half an inch too deep. He freezes, heart pounding, convinced the sound was louder than it was. Travers glances back, eyes calm, not judgmental. He signals a pause. They wait. A minute passes, then another. Nothing happens. Travers leans close. "That urge to rush," he whispers. "That's how blokes get found." As they move again, Reynolds begins to notice patterns. The Australians avoid straight lines. They choose ground that forces awkward movement for anyone tracking them. They cross their own trail, deliberately breaking scent and visual clues. They stop, not when tired, but when the jungle feels wrong. At one point, Travers halts abruptly. Reynolds feels it too, a pressure in the air, something unseen. They wait motionless for nearly 10 minutes. A Vietnamese farmer passes 50 meters away, leading a thin cow. He never looks toward them. His eyes slide past the patch of shadow where 6 armed men are holding their breath. When the farmer is gone, Travers exhales slowly. Reynolds realizes his own lungs are burning. Back at the base, Reynolds strips unnecessary items from his pack. Extra straps, redundant pouches. Things he once considered insurance now feel like liabilities. That evening, he writes notes in a small waterproof notebook. Not mission details. Observations. Weight is noise. Speed creates mistakes. Silence is a weapon. These are not lessons taught in classrooms. They are learned by watching men who have survived long enough to refine them. Reynolds knows this will change how he runs his team, how he trains new men, how he measures success. Not by enemy dead, not by missions completed, but by how little evidence remains that they were ever there. The next joint operation comes 3 days later, deeper than the last. Intelligence suggests a temporary North Vietnamese logistics stop near a dry creek bed, active only at night. The mission is observation only. No interference, no heroics. Reynolds insists his team move behind the Australians, not as a courtesy, as a lesson. They insert before dusk, moving through dense bamboo that clicks softly when disturbed. The Australians slow the pace even further, advancing inches at a time in certain stretches. Reynolds feels sweat soak into his uniform, but he does not rush. As night falls, the jungle becomes a different creature. Sounds multiply. Distance collapses. Every noise feels close enough to touch. Travers halts the patrol with a subtle shift of posture. No signal, no gesture, just awareness shared through experience. The SAS patrol melts into a tight defensive posture, each man covering a slice of darkness. Reynolds and his team mirror them as best they can. Hours pass. At some point, faint shapes appear near the creek. Shadows moving against shadows. The low murmur of voices. The scrape of wood against stone. The NVA element has arrived. Reynolds lifts his binoculars, careful to angle the lenses away from moonlight. He can see men unloading crates. Rifles stacked. Cigarettes glowing briefly before being crushed out. The Australians remain statues. Reynolds notices something unsettling. One of the SAS troopers has positioned himself in what appears to be open ground, no obvious cover. Yet from where Reynolds lies, the man is nearly invisible. His silhouette breaks perfectly against a fallen log and a tangle of vines. Reynolds realizes then how differently they think about terrain, not in terms of cover, but in terms of perception. The NVA unit lingers longer than expected. A patrol wanders dangerously close to the Australians' position, 20 meters, then 15. Reynolds feels tension coil in his chest. His fingers tighten on his rifle. He knows how quickly this could turn into chaos. Travers does nothing. The patrol passes. Boots splash softly in the creek bed. A man coughs. Another laughs quietly. Still, the Australians do not move. Only when the enemy is gone do they withdraw, reversing their approach, erasing signs as they go. Reynolds follows, heart still hammering, mind racing. Back at the extraction point near dawn, Reynolds finally speaks. That was close. Travers nods. Closer than I like. You never shifted. Travers looks at him. Shift and you give yourself away. Stillness is safer. Reynolds absorbs that. As the helicopter approaches, Reynolds extends his hand to Travers. This time there is no polite distance, just professional respect. I learned more watching you than I have in months, Reynolds says. Travers grips his hand firmly. We learned from you lot too. Different jungle, same rules. The helicopter lifts them away, leaving the creek bed and its secrets untouched. Later, Reynolds briefs his team. He does not embellish. He does not dramatize. He simply tells them what he saw and what it means. Silence is not passive. It is active. It requires effort, discipline, and restraint. And in Vietnam, restraint can be the difference between walking out and never being found. Weeks pass, then months. Missions blur together in Reynolds' memory, but the Australians do not fade. Their methods surface again and again, quietly reshaping how he operates. Packs get lighter, movements slow, halts grow longer. The team learns to listen not just for sound, but for absence. On a later mission near the Cambodian border, Reynolds catches himself stopping his men with a single raised finger, then holding them in place far longer than doctrine suggests. A young operator shifts impatiently, then stills as Reynolds locks eyes with him. They wait. The jungle breathes. An enemy patrol passes 30 meters away unseen. Afterward, no one speaks. They do not need to. Reynolds writes after-action reports differently now. Fewer mentions of speed, more emphasis on patience. He stops praising aggression for its own sake. He begins praising men for noticing what does not belong and for leaving nothing behind. Months later, over a beer at a secure facility, another SOG officer asks him about the Australians. Any good? Reynolds considers the question carefully. They're the best recon I've ever seen, he says. Not because they shoot better, because they don't have to. He explains how the SAS treat the jungle not as terrain to dominate, but as a living system to pass through without disturbance. How they accept that every ounce of gear, every rushed step, every unnecessary movement is a broadcast. The officer nods slowly. Think it'll change anything? Reynolds looks down at the condensation on his bottle. Already has. Years later, after Vietnam, Reynolds will still remember that dawn in 1969. The trail, the silence, the way 4 men crossed open ground and left nothing behind but memory. He will remember the realization that the most dangerous soldiers are not the loudest or the most heavily armed. They are the ones the jungle cannot remember seeing. In Vietnam, firepower could win battles. Air support could erase grid squares. But reconnaissance belonged to those who understood a harder truth. The best recon teams are not the ones who fight their way out. They are the ones who are never found at all.